Hello everybody, Jason here from the At the Coalface podcast. I've created a new sub-series called Mentoring Moments, and Mentoring Moments is composed of clips taken from my one-on-one and group mentorship sessions where we discuss e-commerce, digital, retail, and so much more. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. I'm here again with Ashley on one of our one-to-one mentorship sessions, and she's got a good list of questions for us to discuss today. So I thought I'd share that with you. And the first one on your list today, Ashley, is what are some must-have Shopify apps to get started, both free and premium? And this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but the answer is it depends. The reality is that I rarely see a major Shopify project that doesn't have, on average, between 8 to 10 apps associated with it. It's very rare. I would say anywhere from, especially enterprise projects on Shopify Plus, would have anywhere from 8 to 15 apps associated with those projects, both off-the-shelf apps that are in the App Store and usually some form of custom app or private apps in addition to the ones that are in the App Store. So those enterprise projects can get pretty full on in terms of, I guess, both in terms of build complexity, but also app costs can get pretty intense for these larger projects because Shopify has worked over the last 5, 6, 7 years to build up its app ecosystem. There's over 8,000 apps on the App Store. So to say what are some of the standard apps that you would use with every project, that's a little bit hard to say. But some of the buckets of apps that would be the most common that we would see are some of the product bundling and combination apps. Because Shopify has such a limited product model out of the box, as a result of that, in terms of setting up product options and more than 3 layers of product options against a product, because it only goes 3 layers deep. So you can have like size, color, design of a t-shirt. You can go 3 layers deep on your product variants in native Shopify. If you need more than that, then you need an app to be able to manage those additional product options. And especially if they need to be paid upgrade product options, depending on the combination of options that you choose, then you'll typically see that. We see personalization apps being very common, meaning product recommendation apps, all the way from very simple all the way to very complex. All the way simple, meaning product recommendations based on specific rules, or dynamic product recommendations based on AI. Those are the kind of 2 buckets of product recommendation apps or personalization apps that we see. Then we see enterprise site search and merchandising apps being very common and being very popular for Shopify because the native search it's okay, but it's just like with all these SaaS platforms, native site search is pretty average in terms of your ability to tune and optimize and set site search redirects and get deep site search analytics, things like that out of the box is pretty average. Then one of the other things that is very common, in fact, I have yet to see a project that doesn't require this app, and that is the faceting and filtering apps, because native Shopify doesn't have in category or in collection, using Shopify's terminology for categories, collections. They don't have native faceting and filtering within collections within Shopify. And so there's an app called Search and Filter, I think is what it's called, and it's probably the most common app deployed for introducing facets and filters. And the cool thing about that particular app is that you can base the facets and filters on tags and or meta fields against products. And so that makes it really easy to rapidly deploy and set up your faceting and filtering capability on your collection pages. So these are some of the most common ones. Then you, of course, see a lot of the marketing automation integrations like your Klaviyo's and other marketing automation platforms that plug in. Some of your common CDP platforms will have native integrations. And then some of your most common PIM, product information management platforms, will have out-of-the-box app-based integrations with Shopify as well. And then probably one of the next buckets of most common apps that we see are the product listing apps or the omni-channel integration apps that push out your catalog to the likes of marketplaces, to shopping comparison websites, to social media platforms and the like. Now, Shopify out of the box has some native connectors with some select marketplaces, but it's really limited in terms of the flexibility of how you push out that data to those platforms. And so if you want to optimize on the flow through, if you want to optimize for a specific marketplace and you want to slice and dice your catalog data in unique ways for a specific marketplace. So let's say hypothetically you want to on one marketplace, you want the brand of a product to be at the beginning of the name of the product for one marketplace, but you want it to be at the end of the name of the product on a different marketplace. Just for the sake of argument, that's what you wanted to do. You can't do in the native Shopify connectors with these platforms. Whereas with listing connectors or omni-channel connectors, whatever you want to call them, you do have that ability. You have the ability to customize your catalog data for best quote unquote SEO or best listing results on those specific marketplaces or shopping comparison websites. So we're thinking of platforms like GoDaddyFeed and some of the other product listing apps that basically act as a connector between your catalog and social platforms, shopping comparison websites, and marketplaces. And it's not only those apps usually don't just push the products out, but they also pull the orders down. So if it's a transactional platform like a marketplace, then when those orders are placed on that marketplace, they will also pull the orders down, create the orders in Shopify so you can go through the normal order management and fulfillment workflow as well. And then what they'll do is they'll push the shipping information that you put into Shopify, they will push that information back up to marketplaces, mark them as shipped, for example, and lodge the shipping information, which triggers off the transactional email to the customer directly out of those marketplaces. And so it really streamlines the workflow when you're wanting to sell on multiple channels out of your Shopify store, but you want to use Shopify as your main catalog engine, shopping apps, multi-channel connectors, whatever you want to call them, feed engines, shopping feed engines, whatever you want to call them. These connectors are very popular for Shopify merchants. Now, sometimes when you're a bigger Shopify merchant, say you're running Shopify Plus, and let's say you got a PIM system or something like that, sometimes you'll want to connect directly from your PIM system into the marketplace, for example, and then sometimes you'll want your orders to be piped back down into your ERP, your OMS, your WMS, whatever it might be, as opposed to having those orders coming back down to your Shopify store. So it really does depend on the scale of the business and the size of the business in terms of the overall architecture of what you would deploy. But these are some of the most common types of apps that we would see. And then the final bucket is promotional apps. So there is almost no Shopify store that I see deployed today that doesn't have an advanced promotional app installed with it, because within Shopify, you can only run one automatic promotion at a time. You can only have one automatic promotion live at a time. And even then, the promotions that you can run within Shopify are all cart-based promotions. They are not catalog-based promotions. And as a result of that, you are really limited within Shopify of the types of promotions that you can run. You can have them run automatic based on cart rules. You can have them run on cart rules plus a combination of, say, a coupon code that somebody has to enter to qualify. But really, that's about it. And so you're really limited within Shopify of the types of promotions, the types of upsells and cross-sell promotions that you would typically want to run on a given site. You're really limited on what you can do in native Shopify. And so there's almost no project that I see these days that doesn't run an advanced promotional app of some variety. Bold is probably one of the most popular. I think they call it Bold Promotions or something like that. That's one of the most popular apps for advanced promotions on Shopify. And so these are the types of, I guess, scalability challenges that people run into on Shopify if they're not running apps. Then trying to scale and manage all of this manually becomes an impossible task. And so that's why these apps are so popular, because it really does streamline store operations and some of the day-to-day stuff that you do on an e-commerce store anyway, but it just brings high levels of automation to that. In some instances, it'll bring AI or machine learning to the table as well. Some of those apps will, and so they'll make recommendations, or sometimes we need demand planning apps, for example. And so there's Inventory Planner is another very popular Shopify app, which helps to manage demand planning. It basically plugs in, looks at all your historical sales, and then tries to forecast what sales might be moving forward to help you plan your buying in advance and to create your purchase orders with your suppliers so that you can try to understand things like seasonality and the like, and demand in terms of demand growth or velocity. It tries to help you assess what demand is going to be on your store so that you can minimize the amount of stockouts that you have at any given point in time. And these are the types of apps that really, I think, streamline store operations, bring a level of automation to it, but also bring a lot more additional front-end functionality that is much more engaging with the customer. Now, an emerging type of app that I see becoming more and more popular with the desire for store owners to collect more zero and first-party data with the death of cookies and iOS changes, et cetera, they're trying to know more about their customers. And so we're seeing apps like Jebit, which is a quiz commerce app, which basically puts people through a questionnaire, asks them a bunch of questions about their preferences, and then recommends specific products to them. That's capturing their preferences so that you can then remarket to them in a really targeted way based on their preferences of the types of products that you carry. And it also just makes for a better experience when you can recommend highly targeted products based on a series of questions that you ask them. Let's say you sell hair care products and you want to know what their natural color is, what their natural texture of their hair is, what their desired color is, what are some of the hair challenges? Do they have dry hair? Do they have oily hair, etc.? You want to ask them a series of targeted questions as if they were in a salon, and if they were getting asked by their hairdresser, hey, you get asked a whole bunch of questions in your consultation. We're trying to effectively bring that consultative type of experience to the digital realm. And so we're trying to do that through these quizzes and questionnaires and engaging type of experiences that we're creating on the front end, but then also capturing and reusing that data in lots of clever ways. And so I think these are the types of apps, these are the kind of buckets or themes of apps that I would say are really popular for most Shopify deployments in particular. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. These are all great. Do you have any recommendations for connecting with 3PLs or any like shipping type apps or anything like that? More of the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are quite regional in nature. So like, for example, down here in New Zealand and Australia, the most popular apps for that, there's two. One is called Ship It and one is called Starship It. And they're what's known as shipping aggregators. So basically, you then can connect your Shopify store to multiple different carriers with multiple different, and you can set up multiple different price points on the front end, depending on the destination and where they're being shipped to and where your customers is located. So you can do dynamic shipping based on cart quantity, cart weight, volumetric sizing, all sorts of things. Although having said that, because Shopify doesn't allow you to put in sizes, it only allows you to put in weights. There are some limitations there, but there are apps that also allow you to put in your volumetric sizing as part of the app against SKUs. You can upload against your SKUs. You can upload your volumetric sizing so that then you can base your shipping fees on volumetric sizing or weight or a combination of the two, and therefore you then can get much more accurate pricing for your customers in case you don't want to subsidize shipping. You can get real-time rates as well. Some of these apps plug in directly to the carriers. They send the cart contents off to the carrier in terms of weight and size. Then they get a real-time quote back and they present the shipping quote in real time to the customer based on the service level that the customer wants, whether it's overnight, whether it's priority, non-priority, etc. So there's a number of regional apps that connect to local regional carriers depending on the country that you're operating from as a home base. So those would be the ones that are the most popular for that. And then the other bucket of apps that I forgot to talk about was things like returns apps like Loop and some of the other major returns apps that basically turn returns into a really engaging, I wouldn't say fun experience, but definitely makes the experience much better, because Shopify out of the box doesn't offer any formal RMA, request return merchandise authorization functionality and tracking and all that sort of stuff. Managing returns and managing returns requests is a challenge on Shopify. Most Shopify stores, when they first start up, they'll just have customers just email them with all the details, and then they'll manage it on a one-to-one basis, but that becomes really challenging. So returns apps and that whole returns experience is a big one. And then also shipping information apps that provide customers much deeper insights on the entire tracking experience and shipping experience. Those types of apps are also very popular. Basically, everything to do with the logistics experience for the customer, those apps are very popular as well.
And so I guess my last question here is, When you're manufacturing your own products or you're using a third-party manufacturer, do you have to build your own custom apps to connect like the two different systems, or is there a workaround to connect both like the manufacturing area with your e-commerce platform?
Depends on what model you run and what the products are. Like, for example, Shopify has a native out-of-the-box connector, or Printful has created a native out-of-the-box connector with Shopify. So if you want to do like merch, mugs, shirts, those hoodies, those kinds of things, then effectively those are manufacture on demand and then drop ship type of functionalities. And oftentimes those will have native apps built by those third parties that then plug into Shopify. You can create your merch with your designs, etc. And then when an order is placed, it gets sent off automatically via the native integration for those particular SKUs, which are connected to, because oftentimes there'll be a mix. There'll be a mix of pre-manufactured goods that maybe you own in your own warehouse combined with some of those make or manufacture or print on demand products. And so you manage those via SKU. And so you say, okay, this series of SKUs goes off to this supplier, this series of SKUs goes off to this supplier, this series of SKUs we ship directly from our own warehouse, for example. So it does depend. If it's more of a straight up drop shipping scenario, meaning that you're dealing with a third party manufacturer that is holding the stock, you don't actually hold any of the stock, then there are some native connectors that connect automatically with many of the most common dropship manufacturers out there, particularly in China. There's a few, I think it's Oberlo and a couple of others that connect directly to those manufacturers. If it is something where you're having something custom tracked manufactured and either they're manufacturing on demand or they are holding your stock for you effectively on consignment until they ship it on your behalf, then usually, and let's say they're not a common manufacturer that's part of this whole drop shipping Shopify ecosystem, then usually you'll have to do some form of custom integration between your Shopify store and their WMS or their OMS or their order management system or their warehouse management system. You usually have to do something, a custom integration between those two, so that when an order comes in with those SKUs, it gets automatically integrated with their system for fulfillment, including the shipping address and the details and any product customizations, for example, that would be along with that order. And there's apps for that too. So that, for example, if you want a product customized with you want the ability, for example, for your customer to upload a logo to your website for a specific product order that then gets associated and then linked to that order and then sent off with that order to a contract manufacturer, then there's apps that support that model as well. So yeah, definitely there's quite a wide range, and that's why solution architects on Shopify or BigCommerce, any of these major platforms, are so mission critical to be able to architect the right solution for your business needs that is really contextual to your business. And that's where people like myself come in, where we try to find the best combination of native out-of-the-box functionality, off-the-shelf third-party apps, potential customization on top of those apps, or pure custom front-end or app-based functionality. And it's that combination of those things that most brands don't know how to identify. Okay, we need this to be completely custom because we're totally unique and there's nothing out there that allows us to achieve this. Or, hey, we could use this app to do half of this functionality, but we need the other half to be built custom because the app doesn't quite get us there. For example, I was working with a client a couple of years ago, that had an existing website that they had been running for, I think it was 5 or 6 years, and they had a fully custom end-to-end gift registry app built on that platform, and it was probably the most complex gift registry functionality I have ever seen. And they wanted to move to Shopify, and they were in the process of moving to Shopify. They wanted to use an off-the-shelf gift registry app in a perfect world, but there was a tremendous amount of customization on top of that app that needed to be implemented to achieve all of the functionality that was required. And in fact, there also needed to be custom API integration between that custom front-end functionality and the app, because the Shopify app, the out-of-the-box Shopify app, also had a full API suite to where you could integrate custom with it via API. So there was some off-the-shelf functionality that was used based on the native app that plugged into Shopify on the front end, but then there was some custom additional front-end experiential functionality where customers could do weird things with timing and the way that they could the way that they could do invitations to the wish list and combine that with a gift registry. And there was a few other weird things that they had that were their MVP of a gift registry app was 100 times more complex than the MVP of someone who's just setting up a gift registry for the very first time on their website and really needs just basic gift registry functionality, where that native app out of the box for most people would probably be just fine. This company, I had to do like a full day's discovery just on their gift registry functionality to fully understand how their gift registry worked, because they needed to be able to do substitutions. They needed to be able to handle out of stock items that were going to be coming back into stock. They needed to be able to handle multiple shipments for that gift registry. They had a lot of special functionality required for their gift registry. And so this is where a really solid solution architect with lots of experience will add massive value, where they can help you decide, okay, is an off-the-shelf app going to meet our needs? Is native Shopify going to meet our needs? Is customization of just the front-end experience going to meet our needs? Or are we going to need some custom apps or a combination of all 3 or 4 of those things to get us to where we need to be for our full? And only then will you be able to put together an effective BRD, business requirements document, that can then go to an agency, for example, for them to put a proposal against. Because if you're expecting, like most agencies, they can do a certain amount of solution architecture, but they can't help you define your requirements. They will document your requirements and then give you a proposal, but most agencies just don't have the bandwidth to be able to spend the time with you required to help you define your own requirements and identify your own requirements. And that's where specialists like myself come into play, because we understand the pros and cons of multiple platforms. And so when a client comes to me, for example, unless they're dead set on going with Shopify and they're saying, we're going to build on Shopify, whether you like it or not, if they come to me and they say, hey, look, we have this set of requirements, or we think we have this set of requirements, we need you to help us further define and flesh out those requirements, and then help us pick the right platform that is the best aligned with our needs and is going to give us the best value for money and create the best front-end experience for our customers. And so that's where somebody like me, who has exposure to lots of different platforms and their native out-of-the-box functionality and really understands that a deep way, we can provide that kind of advice, that contextual advice on a business-to-business basis. But outside of that, yes, some of those off-the-shelf apps are really good, but sometimes it only gets merchants like 50% of the way there.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, that's really good to know. Invaluable. I'm going to have to find a solutions architect. Oh, I have one.
Oh, funny that I know a guy.
Yeah. Great. No, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Ashley's in the process of developing a new product that she wants to sell online. She's developing her own product from scratch. She's developing her own formulation from scratch. She's developing her own, basically going through the whole NPD, or new product development process, from scratch. And so that, I think, is relevant to anybody who wants to have something contract manufactured, who wants to design, formulate, and then work with partners throughout that process, whether it be just working with manufacturing partners or working also with, say, laboratories or with designers, or if it's something physical, let's say it's an electrical good, working with the appropriate agencies to get certifications. Or I think that this can apply to quite a few different categories of products, and I think this process can apply pretty universally, regardless of category or country or anything like that. I think this is going to be pretty helpful. So the first question you've got here, Ashley, is when you're working with a third party to finish or optimize a product formulation, how do you go about protecting yourself and your product from being stolen? So typically there would be both an NDA that you would sign initially with whoever it is that you're working with, and if it was, say, a lab, or if it was a manufacturer, or if it was somebody that you were working with to do the design process or the formulation process. I don't know, let's say it was a skincare product, which I've got some experience in that vertical. Typically what you would do is you'd be signing a contract with them to where they would effectively be, even though they're doing the formulation to your kind of specs or your outcome, whatever outcome it is that you're looking for, and you're saying, hey, maybe they are trying to find ingredients for a product on your behalf that meets a specific goal of the product. Typically, you would sign a contract where they are doing research and development, so they're doing R&D under contract for you. They can only utilize the outcome of that R&D for your products, and that final formulation is kept secret under contract. So there's usually an NDA that gets signed upon initial discussion, because obviously you need to be able to share with a manufacturer or a laboratory or tertiary institution, a university, something like that. So there may be different routes depending on the product and depending on the product category. You may be working with different groups to develop a product, all the way from design right through to even packaging and things like that. So typically what you would do is you would sign an NDA first. And that way you could be open with them around what it is you're trying to achieve. And usually that NDA only covers that initial phase before you sign a formal contract of services with them. And that's to feel each other out. That's during that initial period of kind of scoping work where you go, hey, this is what we're looking to have designed or built or manufactured or formulated, whatever it might be. Is this something you can do? We're going to tell you, we're going to do like a mini discovery, but it's all covered by NDA. We're going to tell you what we're looking to achieve, and we're going to feel each other out of whether we're a good fit to work together and whether you can actually do the work that we need to have done, right? Then once you figure that out under NDA and, okay, great, we're going to work with this university, or we're going to work with this lab, or we're going to work with this manufacturer overseas in Vietnam or whatever it might be, then at that point, you will usually sign a R&D contract, or you will sign a production contract. And again, the specifics of those contracts will lay out what they can and cannot do. So you may have, I've seen scenarios where certain formulations might be able to be in development on a specific product. Let's say it's a skincare product, can be shared across multiple brands with slight formulation differences to make them unique per brand. But the foundational work might be shared. The cost of R&D for the foundational work, let's say it's an eye cream or something like that. Sometimes a base formulation can be created by a lab, for example. And then let's say you want to have, you want to have a bespoke version of that product made for you. So here's our substrate or our base product. Now we might add olive oil to it, or we might add coconut oil to it, or we might add some local flower essence from your country to it to make it unique to you. But we've got this base product that we formulated. You don't need to pay us for that because we've already done the R&D for that, but we want to customize it for you. So it really does depend on whether this is a truly novel product that's being engineered. Maybe it requires material engineering, whatever it might be. Then that will formulate the type of contract that you go into with that provider. Now, the reality is that in almost all instances, it becomes very difficult to enforce, right? Because you have to have a high level of trust. Because whether that formulation goes out the back door, or it gets lost on a pen drive, or they sell it to multiple customers, you don't know necessarily whether they're going to use that exact same formulation and sell it to multiple customers. So there does have to be a certain level of trust there. Even when it comes down to, I've worked across the shoe vertical before, sometimes lasts, which are the lasts that are designed for one brand, that manufacturer will then use that last for other brands. If let's say it's a sport shoe last, something like that, they might use that. And then the upper and the design and the look and the feel is slightly different, or the insole material is slightly different. But the actual last itself is suitable for multiple customers depending on the outcome they're looking for. So this is a roundabout way of saying you usually start with an NDA. You find out whether you're a good fit. You find out whether you think they can do what you need them to do. You sign a contract for them to do that work. You put in there clauses that you think will protect you as much as possible against reuse or resale to other competitors. But the reality is, unless you are a very large organization that is going to really heavily enforce and create patents for every single thing that you have, a utility patent is usually around things that are mechanical, but patents, trademarks, etc. Certainly you want to trademark any brands, any brand names, and certainly you'll want to do that internationally in any market that you operate in to give at least your brand some air cover. But when it comes to actual products themselves, it is just so hard to protect the IP around physical products, because what could happen is someone could buy your product, even have it sent off to China, have it reverse engineered through spectral analysis, for example, and then they could say, yep, we can make this for you and we can make it cheaper. So even if the manufacturer that you're working with doesn't do the dirty on you, it's pretty easy nowadays to reverse engineer electronics, clothing, shoes, to create patterns out of popular products, to reverse engineer formulations. And presumably, let's say you had a skincare product. I know yours isn't a skincare product, but let's say you were working with a skincare product. Usually you'll list the ingredients on that skincare product, so it's pretty obvious what it is. You won't necessarily list the ratios of exactly what it is, but someone who looks at the ingredients is going to know what's in the product, right? At least as a starting point. I just think that in today's world, it is so difficult to protect something and keep it totally unique forever. But certainly you want to do at least the basic groundwork, which is, hey, let's do some research on these guys. Let's see if they're legit. Let's perhaps get some referrals to some past clients that they've worked with. And you want to make sure that they are as legit as possible and that at least they're not going to be selling you down the river away. That would be my advice, is that protect yourself with an NDA, then protect yourself with a contractual agreement around designs and proprietary research that they do on your behalf that in theory is all licensing is assigned to you on an exclusive basis. But again, I just go back to the fact that it's almost impossible to protect something long-term.
Got it. Understood. Okay. I guess another question is, when it comes to a physical product, you're creating something somewhat from scratch, where are avenues we could look into to create patents or utility patent or process patents? What are the avenues available if we do want to go the extra mile and protect ourselves as much as possible?
Look, there's two ways you can do it. You can certainly file it, for example, with the USPTO. I've done that before with other products. You can even have logos and certain other things registered through the trademark office yourself, USPTO. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is particularly if you're targeting the United States. Every country has their own process of trademarking and patenting. And so that's where if you're wanting to do multi-country, multi-region, multifaceted coverage, if you're wanting like an international patent or an international trademark, that's usually where you would involve the patent and trademark attorney. And almost every country has specialist attorneys. That's all they do. They specialize in patents and trademarks. Particularly once you want to start going international, then they file all the paperwork on your behalf. They know what all the rules and regulations are. They know what the process is. Oftentimes they'll have contacts within those regulatory organizations to help grease the wheels to get them through faster than you could as just a punter off the street filing online. And you will get a higher chance of having your patent accepted if you go through an attorney that knows the process. So you can certainly do it yourself. And I think the USPTO now allows you to do pretty much almost everything online. Just fill out the forms, submit the documentation, submit proof of when, that this is novel, submit proof that this was your idea, submit proof that this was formulated on such and such a date, etc., which there'll be certain documentation you'll need to get from your contract manufacturers or designers or formulators or whatever it is. But once you have all that documentation and you can prove that it's unique, that you came up with the idea, the date that you came up with the idea, and obviously the USPTO, you can do patent searches, trademark searches, making sure that there isn't something that already exists around your product. So that's the key thing, is just to make sure that there isn't already a patent or a trademark around whatever it is you're trying to patent or trademark, or that yours is sufficiently novel that it seems like you would have a high likelihood, because it's expensive. I can't remember what it is because it's been many years since I've worked with the USPTO, but it is expensive to file for patents. It's a time-consuming process. It's going to cost you a fair bit of money with lawyers as well if you go that route. So the reality is you want to try to make sure that yours is novel enough to where you would be granted a patent if you apply for one, or trademark if you apply for one.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
No worries. So you had some other stuff here, which was, how do you determine the rules, regulations, guidelines, certifications, et cetera, we need to start a business, run a business, create a product, sell in whatever market that you're looking to target? Look, again, I think that really comes down to very select professional help, right? It really does depend on the product or the category again. So in certain countries, for example, obviously, if you have a cigarette product, then there's certain regulations that apply to you that are unique to you. Or if you have a vape product, there are certain rules and regulations around how you can. So some products are heavily regulated, other products are not heavily regulated. Food products, drug products, supplement products, anything that someone can ingest or use or take on their skin or something, or that they would be exposed to physically, typically is highly regulated. And each country has its own regulations about what you can sell, and down to even payment gateways will enforce. For example, I know Stripe, they're very hardcore on where you can sell certain supplement products in certain countries. They'll have, like, for example, you'll have a certain supplement that might be legal in every country except for Japan, for example. And so you will have to have a process in place, and you will have to prove to Stripe that you have a process in place to if you sell internationally, you will have to prove to them that you have a process in place to understand what the rules and regulations are across your catalog in every destination country, and that you can prove to them sufficiently to make them comfortable to give you an account to sell through them and use their gateway, that you will not be selling and or distributing a illegal product into a region where it's not legal, right? So there are, depending on the vertical that you operate in, there are third-party services that you can subscribe to that will keep you up to date with what's legal in what countries. For example, in the supplement space, there are several third-party providers of catalog data information around what ingredients, what types of products, what doses, etc., are legal in specific countries. And you can subscribe to that so that you can ensure that you provide the appropriate rules on your products, even to the point where, for example, honey products typically can be imported into Australia to, I think it's every state except Western Australia. Western Australia is very strict on honey products. They won't allow imported honey products into Western Australia, but you can import into other states of Australia. In countries where they have states, like the United States and Australia, you then have regional variations. You have state variations. You have sometimes city-specific rules and regulations. So, and certainly then there's the taxation issue. There is all those other issues. And typically you will either need to work with a professional in the space if it's around a product, or you will need to implement something like Avalara, which I'm not a particular fan of Avalara, but there are other TaxJar and other platforms that can help you be tax compliant if you are exporting all around the world. At least you can get the tax compliance piece automated. But when it comes to trademarks, when it comes to patents, when it comes to taxation is a pretty clear one typically, because we've got these third-party tools that can help us with that. But when it comes to compliance, that is a minefield, and it really does depend on the vertical or the product.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So are there any resources or tools that you would recommend off the top of your head, just get started?
The only thing you can really do is to Google, and I know this sounds like a trite response, but every country will have if it's come down to your patent or your trademark, then, usually YouTubing how to file for a patent in United States, how to file for a trademark in the United States. There's usually, it's like immigration, right? It's a similar sort of thing. You can go to an immigration specialist, or you can do it yourself. And if you do it yourself, if you've got a lot of time on your hands, like when we applied for our residency in Mexico, for example, we chose not to go through an immigration consultant. Now, we could have gone through an immigration consultant. We could have paid them a fee. They could have gathered all the paperwork on our behalf. They could have submitted it on our behalf and handled it on our behalf. We chose to do it ourselves because when we did our research, we downloaded the forms. We felt comfortable and confident enough that we could navigate that process. And it was the same when we first moved to New Zealand. My family navigated that entire immigration process ourselves. We filled out all the documentation. We went through the entire process ourselves. And so that gave us an extra level of confidence that now that we're looking to move to Mexico, that we could navigate that process ourselves. But again, there are lawyers, there are consultants, there are people out there for almost any task that you want to accomplish, particularly if it's a regulated process within a given country. There are always people that can do it, but usually by downloading the forms, doing the Googling, doing the YouTubing, you can usually figure out how to do, I would say, somewhere between 70 and 90% of regulatory compliance, unless you're in a highly high, like obviously if you're in the drug space, then that's a whole different kettle of fish. But outside of very specific niches that really require ultra specialist expertise, 70 to 90% of the stuff you can probably do yourself.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've started doing some research on the Small Business Administration's website just to get me started, and it's been a pretty good resource. So I'll keep diving in.
Yeah, and look, sometimes you can find someone who is maybe a facilitator, or they are someone that the SBA is paying for their services, for their kind of mentorship services, for their assistance to guide people through starting up a business or through the process of filing for patents and trademarks. Sometimes those local and state bodies will help with that, or at least they can point you in the right direction of someone trustworthy to work with. If it's an attorney that you need or a consultant that you need, they can usually point you in the direction of someone trustworthy that hasn't had a lot of negative reports filed about them. with the SBA, for example. Yeah, or they haven't been censured, or you can do an element of due diligence by looking online. How long have they been in business? Trying to find reviews on them, because people that have been screwed over by businesses tend to be quite vocal. And so they tend to be vocal on social. They tend to be vocal all over the internet. Yeah, just anytime you're looking to engage a professional, it's always worth doing at least a little bit of due diligence on them, Google reviews, etc. And for example, I recently had my washing machine serviced, and these guys, tradies in particular, now are relying on Google reviews like never before. They specifically said, hey, if you think we've done a great service for you, please go and give us a good Google review, because that is becoming such a really important part of people choosing to do business with us, is having online reviews about our services. So definitely check out Google reviews and just try to do as much due diligence as you can.
For sure, will do.
And I think we were talking about some other things around some of the KPIs for online. What are core KPIs that you would look at? Look, I think, again, that's probably a little bit different whether you're in startup phase, whether you've been around for a while and you've got some benchmarks, some internal benchmarks that you're looking to improve around AOV, CLV. I think it's probably more important to understand what those metrics mean, how you've arrived at those metrics, what systems you're using to analyze those metrics, and making sure that you're gathering as much zero and first party data as possible, so that when you're looking at something like CLV, oftentimes that's just based on a revenue figure. But as we've discussed before, there's a whole lot more to customer lifetime value in terms of what is their profitability to us as a business, what do they cost to serve, what do they cost to acquire. There's a whole lot of things that come into what I consider a true CLV value versus just how much revenue did someone generate for us over a 12-month period, or over a rolling 24-month period, or pick an arbitrary time frame. So I think that those KPIs are a little bit business specific. They are based on what phase of your business life cycle that you are in, and they're also based on making sure that you have a complete picture of whatever data set that you are looking to analyze. I think those are the keys from a very high level perspective.
Yeah, and if you have any recommendations for good resources, just learning about more in depth about the numbers and the analytics and creating a strong foundation for a business, like I would love any recommendations you may have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to developing an analytical mindset, anything by Avinash Kaushik is really good. His Analytics 2.0 book is very good. It's getting a little long in the tooth now, but I think anything by him is really going to help you develop a really well-rounded analytical mindset, and really starting to think through multifaceted lenses on data. I think anything by him, anything by that is put out by CDP platform vendors, they've usually got a lot of useful data. They've got a lot of useful information, a lot of useful videos. Boston Consulting Group has put out a fair bit of good information around CDPs and the value that they can bring to businesses. They've got some fairly in-depth research. So Boston Consulting Group has put out a fair bit of information around that. So look, I think there's some really good sources out there, but really it's about developing a really thorough mindset around how do we become data-driven as a business. And that's more than a tool, that's more than a specific KPI. That is, how do we ensure that when we go to develop a KPI, or when we go to look at a KPI, or when we go to look at a data set, how do we make sure that we're gut checking our own thinking about this, about A, why are we collecting this data? B, even if we collect this data, do we have effective benchmarking data to compare ourselves, both to ourselves and potentially to others operating in similar verticals? Do we have an action-based framework that even if we're analyzing this data, even if we have a KPI, do we know what levers to pull to improve those KPIs? And do we have the will internally to pull those levers? Even if we have the levers to pull, do we have the will to do that? And can we break down silos within the business to make that happen? So for example, usually an e-commerce manager will be responsible for conversion rate. But there's a whole ton of stuff that impacts conversion rate that are well outside of the purview of an e-commerce manager. So when we think of logistics, when we think of purchasing, when we think of all the things that determine whether a product is going to be in stock or out of stock, one of the biggest determiners of conversion is your average percentage of catalog in stock. So at any given point in time. So if at any given point in time, 10% of your catalog is out of stock, there is always a direct correlation between your inventory availability across your catalog as a percentage and your conversion rate. They are tightly correlated, because if someone comes to your website and they would look at buying 2 or 3 items, but there's one item that they're looking to buy that's out of stock, oftentimes they will abandon the entire cart and they will go to another vendor that's got all of those items in stock so that they get things like free shipping thresholds and all that sort of stuff. Whilst you might only have one of their items that's out of stock, that can dramatically impact conversion rates across any combination of carts that would have that product in it. And so therefore it has an outsized impact on conversion. And that is usually something that the e-com manager has very little control over. It is usually the sourcing department. There's usually someone that's head of product or head of inventory, head of whatever it is that they're head of internally that manages buying, sourcing, stocking. Whoever's responsible for that, they have probably a bigger impact on conversion than the e-com manager does. So if the e-com manager has if that is not a joint KPI, for example, that is shared between product sourcing and inventory and e-com management, if that's not a shared KPI, then someone's going to be set up for failure. So these are the types of things that you have to think about through a very, very broad lens when you're looking at setting up KPIs. It's like sales and marketing KPIs. Those should be shared. They should never be siloed, because their marketing should be helping to drive sales and sales should be helping to close sales. So the reality is those have to be shared KPIs because they all fall under the revenue banner. And so otherwise you're going to get siloed thinking and siloed responsibilities, and you can get marketing driving leads, but they're shitty leads, but they've met their KPI in terms of lead generation, right? So there has to be an agreed and accepted standard for all KPIs, particularly shared KPIs, and you have to empower people with the authority to hit those KPIs cross-functionally. So from a broad, high-level perspective, understanding how to build an analytics framework in your business is important. Making sure you're capturing all the data relevant to those KPIs and analytics is important. Make sure they're plumbed into a central system that can run the appropriate analytics on those KPIs or to generate those KPIs and track your performance against those KPIs. And then ensuring that you have cross-functional teams, processes, and KPIs that everyone is they're like sled dogs, right? We all need to be pulling in the same direction to achieve our goals as a business. So those are the key areas that I would say to focus on from a high level.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to check out some of these books and recommendations that you gave.
If you'd like to register for free for the Mentor Sessions with Jason Greenwood, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason. See you there.